You must recognize this ubiquitous tune. But now, listen to this. It's a rather different take from Max Richter on the Vivaldi melodies that have so saturated our airwaves, whether through TV commercials, elevator music, or even mobile ringtones.
And his way to do that was to recompose it, which meant to take the original and, in a sense, to put a new frame around it. So it's a new piece, it's a new composition, but there are very strong elements of the original, and yet there's Max Richter's own music in there.
Richter has deconstructed Vivaldi's original, putting it through a series of electronic and minimalism processes such as sampling, looping, and remixing.
The sound is very different because in the recomposed, it's amplified, so that the orchestra and you become much louder. It's a different feeling. The first note you play, suddenly it's you know, a big dimension. Whereas in the original Vivaldi, it's reduced, it's small, it's that beautiful Baroque sound world. So the second you play, in fact, you're in Max's world.
Yet, in quoting from the original, Richter is not overpowering it. The chamber orchestra remains true to the source even amid the electroacoustic layers. And just like the seasons, musical eras change. But in the hands of Richter and Hope, the composer's original voice still rings through centuries later.
Welcome to Beijing. Welcome to ICON.
Thank you very much. Great to be here.
This is your, just said, this is the 4th visit to Beijing.
It is, yes. I've been coming regularly now for the last 5 years. And it's great to be here and great to make music here in China.
Like you said, you've been here almost every year, once every year. And what is the impression of the classical music scene in China now?
I think it's incredibly exciting. I think that there are so many young people in China that love music, that love classical music, that play instruments. So you feel a connection, you know. Anywhere that loves music is where we feel welcome as musicians. And especially here in China, you have these halls, these amazing concert halls in every town, at least one, if not more. So, you know, for a classical musician coming from Europe, it's a joy because we get to do what we love doing and to meet new audiences, and audiences of all different ages. That's what I find fascinating in China, is you have a cross-section of so many different ages in the concert hall. And that's quite different to Europe, where mostly it's an older audience that is attracted, you know, primarily to classical music.
So the young generations are not only just doing it, playing the instruments, they are also coming to enjoy the performances presented by people like yourself, I guess.
Very much so. And, you know, often I get the chance to talk a little bit to some audience members after the concerts, you know, when you sign CDs and you have conversations, or I did in Beijing at a kind of a literature cafe. I did like a Q&A the last time I was here, and I got to speak to Chinese students and to exchange views. And that, as a musician, for me is very important, because you get to not just play the music, which is obviously the greatest thing you can do, but also to communicate directly to people. And they ask you questions about your instrument or about the music you play, and that kind of dialogue, that's why I do what I do. I find that young music lovers, especially today, are so well informed, you know, because music is accessible. We are able to compare interpretations, musicians, musical tastes by listening to them quite instantaneously. And that changes the way people see music and listen to music. People exchange music, and there's a very open discussion that takes place about what you like in music and what you don't like. And that's, I think, the big difference now with the younger audience, is that they're informed and that they are willing to experience something. They're hungry for information. And I feel that when I play. And especially when I play here, I feel there's an eagerness in the audience. And that's why, for example, now with this project, I'm so happy to come with Max Richter's music, a piece I've played all over the world, but not yet in China. And again, this is taking a masterpiece which everybody knows and loves, The Four Seasons, the most popular piece of classical music ever written, and changing it, recomposing it, reframing it. So I'm fascinated to see how the Chinese audience will react to this piece in particular.
It's an interesting project. It's four seasons, but four seasons of a different kind. You know, you have your friend Max Richter's recomposition, and also you have the original. You put half of the old, half of the new. And how often do you play like that?
You know, I've been playing this piece by Max Richter for the last 4 years. He wrote it for me, and I absolutely love it. When I first heard about it, I was not sure, because he said to me, I want to recompose the Four Seasons of Vivaldi. And I said, is there a problem with the original?
Question.
Because for me, there's nothing greater than the original. You know, I love that piece. I've played it since I was a little boy, and everyone knows it. So why would you want to change it? Why would you want to even touch it? And he said something very interesting. He said, of course, he said, there's nothing better than Vivaldi. He said, the problem is not the music. The problem is the way we've treated Vivaldi in the last 30, 40 years. He said, we use the music. We use it in elevators. We use it in shopping centers. We use it on hold on the phone. He said, my brain doesn't recognize the music anymore. It just blanks it out. And he said, that's a shame for Vivaldi. So what I've decided to do is to deconstruct this masterpiece and to fall in love with it again. And his way to do that was to recompose it, which meant to take the original and, in a sense, to put a new frame around it. So it's a new piece, it's a new composition, but there are very strong elements of the original, and yet there's Max Richter's own music in there. Max is principally a film composer. He's written wonderful film soundtracks to Shutter Island, for example, or the film Waltz with Bashir. And his style of music is very moving and very, very deep. And the juxtaposition of that with Vivaldi makes it fascinating.
Yeah, when I listened to the recomposition, it sounded very picturesque. Actually, you can have a picture in your mind, and you can sometimes even take them directly to use for movies, basically, as the background music. But like you said, you've been playing Vivaldi since you were a child, and now you're playing Max's recomposition. Do you find it sometimes disorienting?
Not anymore. When I first started to play it, yes, because, you know, I would still keep going back into the original, because the original is so much part of my DNA. It's right in there. And so Max, he takes the original and he does different turns, he changes suddenly. And so it took me a while to get used to it, like the orchestra as well. They were expecting to play the original and suddenly it changes. But after I played it, it's become part of me now. And what I love to do is to play the original in the first part and the recompose in the second, because then the audience can also see and listen to the differences. They can choose. And I think the two pieces together, they coexist beautifully.
Well, I mean, for this concert in Beijing and in Shanghai, you're basically playing half and half. First half, second half?
Full and full. I mean, I do the whole Four Seasons in the first half and the whole recompose in the second half.
Yeah, I mean, first half of the concert will be the old, and then the second half will be about the new.
Yeah.
But do you have to reconstruct yourself? I mean, when you play the two different versions?
Your brain readjusts automatically.
Right. All right.
Also, the sound is very different, because in the recomposed, it's amplified, so that the orchestra and you become much louder. it's a different feeling. The first note you play, suddenly it's you know, a big dimension. Whereas in the original Vivaldi, it's reduced, it's small, it's that beautiful Baroque sound world. So the second you play, in fact, you're in Max's world.
So when Max talked about his recomposition, recomposing, he means to break down the original and kind of find the patterns and motifs and recontextualizing it and find, you know, sampling with the loops and everything. It sounds very much electronic, and that's what young generation musicians do with their new music. And do you find it comprehensive with what you've been educated about, you know, in the traditional classical music way?
The interesting thing about this piece is that Max Richter believes that there is natural looping and repetitions in Baroque music. And in a sense, he's right. If you go back to Vivaldi and Bach, they would use repetitions of bass lines. And in those days, they would improvise on top of those bass lines. We called the continuo group, we would call them, which was basically like a backing band, would repeat phrases, and they would put in small variations. And Max has taken that principle and transferred it to the 21st century. So he believes the looping actually is just, in a sense, a bit of time travel, but the same thing
happens. Not something new.
No. And that's also, I find, an interesting concept. Max's music is kind of more in the minimalist style. That means he works with repetitions. He works in that world of, let's say, Steve Reich and Philip Glass. It's closer to that sound world, even though he's a very different composer. But the fascinating thing, I think, is the mixture of the Baroque and the new. He's done this in an assimilation, which makes this piece, for many people, quite startling and shocking. Firstly, they don't know what to think, and mostly by the end, they really love it. And I think that's why not just young people, but all people around the world have embraced this piece the way they have. Well, also the idea of recomposition is not new. You know, the first person really to recompose Vivaldi was Johann Sebastian Bach. He was the one that took pieces of Vivaldi and he transcribed them, he changed them. And composers have done this throughout history. So again, this is not a new idea, but Max has used the sound world of today to make it a new piece.
He sometimes appears on stage together with you. He plays music with you, with the piano or with the synthesizer, but he's not around this time.
Unfortunately not. He's so busy, and you know, film music is his main passion.
Right.
At the moment he's writing several scores. We're lucky we can get him sometimes, to get him out of his studio and put him on the stage. We played at the Edinburgh Festival together in August, but usually it's just a few times, you know, or even once a year if we're lucky.
But do you still need a keyboard player to play his role on the stage with you?
No, but we have an electronics, we have a sound engineer that mixes in live electronics into the performance. So in a sense, it replaces the function that Max would do. It's nicer if Max is there, in any case, to play with the composer on the stage, like with Tandun. For me, is the greatest experience. But in terms of the piece, it's not necessary. Max composed it in such a way so that we could always perform it. But if he comes, then it's just a nice added element.
when I listen to the recomposition, the Four Seasons, and then sometimes I find violin not that, prominent actually in the whole piece, and sometimes I couldn't even find the violin in it. And that's something that you can accept, or this is really also one of the new concepts about this recomposition?
Well, in the Baroque music, the violin has the leading function, but it doesn't mean necessarily the violin is always playing. The ensemble was always led by the violinist. There was no conductor in those days. And he's taken that principle. So there are, of course, big solo moments, but there are moments where I really integrate inside the orchestra, inside the band. And I think it's very beautiful because it becomes, in a sense, like a symphony sometimes. You're part of the orchestra, and there are moments where you absolutely dominate. It has both those worlds, the same way that the original does as well. In the original, you have many, as we call them, tutti passages, where you play together with the orchestra, and then you have moments where the elements, like the birds, or the lightning, or the thunder, or the shepherds dancing, all the images of the original Four Seasons, Vivaldi brings the violin out at certain moments and makes it very, very virtuoso, and then takes him back again and makes him part of the scenery.
Is it difficult to find an orchestra to work with?
No, it's not.
I mean, in terms of its musicality.
It's not difficult, but it's wonderful to have orchestras with whom you connect and with whom you share a common ground. And I'm lucky enough to work with some of the greatest orchestras in the world, especially chamber orchestras, small orchestras, where you don't have the conductor, where I'm just leading from the violin. That for me is a particular thrill, and there are two orchestras with whom I work a lot. Latte del Mondo is the one. I'm with them here now in China. It's a German chamber orchestra, fantastic group, specialized in Baroque music. And so when we play the Vivaldi, they play with all of the Baroque elements. And the other one is the Zurich Chamber Orchestra, where I next season become music director, and they are a fabulous, fabulous ensemble. And the connection that you have with these players is instantaneous. You're playing with them at the same time, the signals are coming, and the energy is really out there.
And about the recomposition, to what extent were you involved?
Basically the piece was finished when Max contacted me. He sent me the sketches, and I liked what I saw very much. I made a few small suggestions, and then we met in the recording studio and we recorded the piece. And throughout the recording, many things changed, because he would ask me, what do you think of this, what do you think of this? So I was often asking him, could I maybe change this, something violinistic, or I made a suggestion. So it was a synthesis that took place inside of the recording. And then we started to go on tour, and since then I've played it about 150 times, and every time it changes. So from the initial stages to now has been a huge change, but it has come very gradually.
Well, I mean, in the end, you're still a classically trained violinist. When we talk about recomposing a classic like that, I mean, are there any bottom lines you wouldn't be touching? Say, these are the backbone, these are the cores of these classical music.
There are moments in the recomposed piece where Max has left the original, and in those moments I play exactly as if I were playing Vivaldi. I don't touch the original. The original is the original, and that's, up there somewhere. So when those moments come, it is completely Vivaldi, with the same respect and the same seriousness. And yet I look to place them within its new role. It's like a jigsaw puzzle. And you put these pieces together, and Max's music does the rest.
It's like you keep the core, but at the time when you can, you do your own tricks.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, I mean, talking about your style, when I listen to your music, it's, well, what's the word? It's different. And according to New York Times, and you've been called adventurous and brilliant, a violinist of probing intellect and commanding style. So how would you describe yourself musically?
I would say that I'm musically hungry for information and for music. I'm addicted to music, and I love music. I love listening, playing, sharing, talking, presenting about music. I believe that people connect to music in a very special way, and I think music is an amazing tool and an inspiration for so many people. I don't think music can change the world, but it can make you think. And making you think means it changes the way you are. So it can change certain things. And I would say that I'm a passionate music lover.
There are, different types of musicians, different types of violinists. Many of them, I guess, they are more comfortable playing classical music in the classical way. Well, you are actually, I can see you're trying out all these different genres, crossing over. It seems you are not satisfied with only the traditional way, sitting in one category. Is that you?
Well, I would say that I'm inspired by so many different types of music, and I think that goes back to my childhood. I was very lucky to grow up very close to Yehudi Menuhin, a great violinist, and he was somebody that he did not believe in categories of music. On the same day, you could see him performing classically with somebody like Rostropovich or Wilhelm Kempff, with Stefan Grappelli doing jazz, with Ravi Shankar playing Indian music. And I grew up close to that, very close, and absorbing it. And so I didn't realize until I was about 10 or 12 that there were actually different categories of music. I just believed music was this great thing. And that's always been my credo. I've always believed that. I always felt that. So when I hear a great musician, there's something about him or her that inspires me. And it doesn't make a difference where they come from. I listen for that element, and if that element interests me, then I want to know more. And that's the way I've always based whatever I do. So it's not a question of not feeling comfortable. It's more a question of being inspired. And for me, music is pure inspiration. We're here to make, I hope, the ultimate Hollywood record. We're in search of the Hollywood sound. Many of these musicians were forced out of Europe by the Nazis in the 30s, and some emigrated to California, where they saw this challenge to take up the composition of film music. And as a result, they changed the way forever that film music would sound.
I guess the most interesting part of concert performance is the opportunity to be able to communicate in different ways with the audience, right?
Absolutely, and that direct communication is something that we look out for, and we look forward to it.
Well, you're certainly someone with many interests. You play music, you research into history, you write, and you carry this precious Guarneri violin. That's from
1742.
1742.
Yeah.
And you carry around, in that case, I see pictures of your family.
Yes.
You always carry them with you, right, wherever you go.
I do. And we travel a lot together. I have a young son. And at the moment, when we can, I bring them with me. But if not, then they're always very close to me.
And I also see some special cards in the cage. What are they?
Those are our concerts, particular special concerts that I remember, like my debut in the Hollywood Bowl. That for any musician, that's an amazing moment. Carnegie Hall again.
Right.
There are, just certain times of all the concerts you play, there are certain memories you have, and I take them with me in my case.
Yeah, probably we can hope next time we can see you're adding to your collection little card from NCPA here in Beijing.
I'm sure.
Right. Thank you very much once
you
again
so
for your
much.
time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.